Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. We're your hosts, Greg and Rachel Denning. And in spite of our massive, underdeveloped education, in spite of the embarrassing amount of uninformedness,
We even have to make up some words to describe
I have to make
this.
up words to describe how underqualified we are to talk about this subject.
I think the made up words will definitely help with that.
It helps expose our underqualifiedness
Yes.
and our undereducatedness. In spite of all that, we still feel like we have to talk about what's going on in the world. And not in the world so much as trends in society.
We're not even sure what we're talking about, except that we feel like we need to talk about it.
because I think we and I would say most people sense that something's really off.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe they can't quite articulate like we can't.
Right.
And they're just like, yeah, things are weird, things are off, things aren't right.
What's going
feels wrong.
How do we talk about this?
Right. And so,
what's the problem?
Okay, there's the other problem is that we, ourselves included, are afraid to talk about it.
Right.
Because if you start saying, hey, wait a minute, no, that doesn't seem right, you're immediately labeled as racist, prejudiced, homophobic. Well, I mean, they come up with words every day. They're making up new words to make you feel bad about
So we're not so bad for
something.
making up words. Then.
Yeah, right. We're just part of the party.
Right.
They're like, well, no, and they're coming up with new labels. And if you stand for something, they're going to label you as something else. And if you have values and standards, if you think, okay, let's just throw down here. If you think that marriage is a great thing for society and that families are the right way, and if you're all about, heterosexual relationships and fidelity, and if you're in favor of education, and
if nothing else, because heterosexual relationships still make up 90% of society.
Right. But if you do that, you're bigoted and small-minded and homophobic, and let's just throw racist in there for good measure, because if you think marriage is good, you're probably racist. We're playing around a little bit here, but we're also dead serious. That's how and we're using they,
whoever they are.
Is who this they is. I don't know that there's you couldn't walk in a crowd and be like, there they are. It's not that. But there are people who...
Unless that's their pronouns or something.
Are
they, them.
maybe that's it. So if they embrace the they, then that's who we're talking about. But there is a concerted effort to undermine traditional values.
I don't even know if
even saying traditional, they're like, oh, it's just old-fashioned. Like, you got to catch up. You're behind the times. Like, there's this attack on values.
I don't even know per se if it is a concerted effort as much as it is a trend or a mass hypnosis. Because, there's definitely, I've listened to a couple podcasts about mass formation, which is a type of mass hypnosis that happened during COVID.
Well, it's happening in other ways right now, too.
Although, yeah, it is. Although, back to the idea of a concerted effort, yes, there is evidence, especially when you dig into it further, which I've done inadvertently through podcasts and things like that there are people who in the 50s, 60s, 70s began infiltrating the education system, specifically higher education, and because to date, the education system is primarily dominated by what we'll call left ideologies or left-leaning Democrats. It's that group of people that are primarily in the education system, both in the administration, holding positions as professors, and the student body. Like, it is mostly left-leaning people. There are very, very, very few conservatives in the education system nowadays. Now, that didn't just happen by accident. Actually, I've listened to multiple podcasts about that. It happened through concerted effort. Partly as a result, it's also led to the fact that most positions in the government, most of the big businesses today, Google, Facebook, Meta, most of them are run by people who went to university. So it's this trickle-down effect that's occurred, starting with the education system, that has led to this spread of ideas, not just because traditional education, as we used to think about it, is not what it was anymore. And it's now spreading into government and into big business and into the media and into everything, because naturally that's where most of those people spent time in Ivy League schools and universities in general. So when there's part of me that like, oh yeah, there's no concerted effort of like somebody's in charge making all of these things happen. But in a way there is, because I recently just listened to a couple podcasts about that there are people who in the 60s and 70s had Marxist ideas, and they became very deliberate about spreading those in the universities, which has then like just grown over time. Like it's metastasized. They literally use that word. It's metastasized, carrying over into now public schools for children.
And elementary schools, where they're
schools
deliberately and in some cases forcing teachers and administration to teach queer theory,
critical race theory,
and transgender things to little kids.
Right.
And that stuff should absolutely
so yes,
stay
you're right.
out of.
It's not like there is this
schools.
Organizing body, board of directors or something that's directing this, but it is also in a way a concerted effort. It very much is.
And I want to back up just for a second, because you mentioned the people who are left or Democrats, whatever. Like we don't have any beef with Democrats per se, and we don't have any
right.
or actually. I don't even like the
I
two-party
think I
system
mentally
or the politics.
considered myself a Democrat at one point. Like I was definitely born into a Republican family, but over time I thought, oh, I'm more like a Democrat. Now, according to their definition, I'm definitely not a Democrat.
Or a Republican, for that matter.
But, I mean, if someone had to put me in a box, that's probably more where I would be, is Republican.
Yes, I don't like either of those boxes, and I don't play in boxes.
Agreed, but...
And we don't have anything against leftist ideas. I think where the big concerns are,
well,
and again, on extremes of both sides, there's
yes.
problems. But what we just watched this morning as a family about fascism, that's where I have major concerns, and we all should. So, because on the far left is where fascism is, and it was founded by Gentile, who was a philosopher in Italy, and Mussolini was his little
proponent.
Yeah, I mean the guy who was just like, "Woo," he loved Gentile, and so he implemented it. And was just an absolute horrible dictator. But fascism is a far left ideology. And
well, okay, so just to clarify for a second, because like you were saying, ultimately we need ideas from the left and right. We have to have these sort of opposing ideas to help society function. Just like we need a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere in our brain to function.
And like we need a man and a woman to function.
Right, which is an idea that now is... You can't share that idea, but if we use the brain idea, we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, and that's not by accident. Like that is something that is significant. We need both. And just like for our body to function, our entire being to function, we also need that in society. For society to function, we need left and right.
Yep.
We need them.
And we need men and women.
And we need men and women.
And marriages need men and women.
But,
and families need men and women. Children need moms and dads.
Yes. But the danger happens when, in fact, I just recently heard this, that depression is actually a disease of, essentially they said something like, when the left brain takes over. Like if your left brain takes over and you don't have any little development on the right side of your brain, it is directly connected with depression. That's what we're kind of talking about here, that when there becomes an imbalance, especially if you think we love to use yin and yang, because that's also another good representation, I think, of like left and right hemisphere. If that becomes off balance and there's too much of the yin or too much of the yang, that's where the danger lies. And I think that ultimately, if we could label what we're talking about today, it's kind of that idea, that on the extreme ends of left or right, because, Nazi Germany was right-wing extremism that led to the Nazis.
They were national socialists, right? I just learned that this morning. Nazi was just kind of this little
contraction
of National Socialists, right? And socialism essentially is very left, and fascism. He was fascist, and so any point where the state, the government, wants to control all the outcomes, quote, for the good of your people. It's like, it's for your own safety. It's for the good of the whole. When you hear those words, be warned. Like, there's real trouble. And those things are happening right now.
So it's the extremism on either side that's the concern we're talking about today, because that's where the danger lies. And I do think that that's the problem right now, obviously, that there's too much extremism currently on the left.
And some on the right. So there's extreme.
Because I think it always exists. There's always the fringes. So there's always extreme left and extreme right.
But when the fringes start
But when the fringes become the majority, that's when we get into danger.
Or the biggest decision makers.
I guess that's
I don't even think they're the majority. I think the majority is just quiet.
Yeah.
People who want to be good human beings, they want to live, they want to get married and have kids and live a good life.
Good, stable, healthy
life.
They're
quiet. And here's one of the things I've been thinking about, and it's tough, because one of the strengths of just being a good person is you don't like to offend other people, and you don't like to speak up, and you're like, hey, just let me live my life.
And I'll let you live yours.
You do your thing. I'm cool. You want to do your thing? Do your thing. Let me do my thing.
Right.
But then they won't leave it alone. They're like, no, they're not going to do their thing, and they want everyone else to accept them, and they want to literally pass laws forcing others to refer to them a certain way, or to, do what they're doing,
or to teach a certain thing.
Yeah, we're going to force the silent majority to be taught about this teeny minority problem that's off, honestly, and it's not healthy. It's not normal. There's
normal meaning it doesn't apply to the majority of the people,
and to like what actually works in society.
What actually constitutes like a healthy family, overall well-being and a healthy community
and a healthy life,
right?
And healthy psychology and a healthy identity. So good people keep quiet, and then when they try to say something, they get labeled as being racist or bigoted or prejudiced, and as a good person, you're like, no, that's not me. I'm not racist. I'm not bigoted. I'm not prejudiced. I'm not homophobe. And so we back off, and we won't stand our ground and say no. Like, this is a standard, and this is what works for millennia. This is what like nature and science obviously show.
The problem is it's not necessarily obvious, because unless you actually study and learn a lot, you can fall prey to the ideas that are being taught, which is, oh no, this whole idea of the traditional family, this whole idea of sex and gender, like that's just a social construct. Right. It has nothing to do with our biology. It has nothing to do with healthy psychology. That's just a lie you've been told. The reality is there's fluidity. There's it's not binary. It's not one or the other.
I think one of the most evil examples of this, right, that's happening right now, is that they're teaching in many places, in universities and even other younger, lower levels of education, they're teaching that pedophilia or sexual attraction for children is a normal thing. And they're trying to promote it as like, well, everybody has it to some degree, and it's okay to be a minor attracted person.
Right.
And like
a minor attractive person. Well, I think that is the extreme end of what we're talking about. Like there's all sorts of levels here that we could argue are not good or evil or really bad. But to me, at least, that right there is like, okay, yeah, for the majority of people, they're not going to disagree that when it comes to children, there needs to be some strict rules. But the problem is that we don't realize that it's actually creeping up on us. We don't realize that it's already infiltrating our school systems and the peer groups, and like it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's
so much
just
of it has been kept quiet for so many years.
Yes, and it's just almost on this tipping point of where, minor attracted persons, like that's a thing. Let's just accept that too, because we've accepted everything else. So, and I really feel that that's where we are. We're on the verge of a tipping point where things are really bad, but they're going to be worse. Like they're going to get worse before they get better. And that's what's terrifying to me. And that's, I guess, why we're having this conversation, even though we're like, what are we even talking about exactly? We're just talking about it. Like, what's going on here? Because, like I said to you last night, and this seems in some ways like an extreme idea, but yet it is how I feel after having, I mean, I've been thinking about this and learning about this at least since COVID, for sure. Probably, 4 years at least. And so I don't say this lightly, but I feel like we are in the same place people were in 1939 Germany. Like, we're on the brink of this Holocaust of atrocity that's right now just happening under the surface in a lot of places, but it's starting to bubble up more and more if you pay attention to it and you're noticing it. Like, it's coming. It's bubbling up. And we will look back at this period of time with the same horror I think we did on the Holocaust, saying, what in the world happened? How did this happen?
Yep.
How did we allow this to happen right under our noses?
That's already the case with human trafficking. And
definitely with human
sex
trafficking,
especially of children,
right.
Women and children, and people who are like displaced families, or people who are going through some kind of disaster, or just the people who are struggling and suffering the most. They're getting taken advantage of by the most evil predators, and that's happening in the millions right now. It is happening while we're talking, in the millions. And what are we doing about it?
Right.
This is insane. I was listening to Nietzsche this morning. And in his time, he said that. He said, we are entering a time of war. And he said, I can see it. I can see it on the horizon. I can see it in society. I can see what's going on. Like, war is coming. And of course, he was right. And he called it out because he saw it. And he saw the strange things happening. And when he said that this morning, I was like, yeah, that's where we're at. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll look differently this time.
Yeah, definitely.
There's going to be variations. Well, and without doubt, there are outside influences and maybe enemies to to our society, enemies to the United States in particular, or enemies to Western societies that are participating
essentially
in
democracy,
the weakening.
right.
Yeah, they're in democratic republics, and they're attacking that, and they're doing it. They've been playing the long game.
Yeah.
And there are nations and ideologies that
specifically Iran
that hate that. Well, Iran and China and Russia are some of the ones that come to mind, and North Korea. And so they've been playing this long game, and this is going to sound like conspiracy theory, but all you got to do is research a little bit, and you're like, oh man, okay, it's actually happening. They want to weaken, and they want to help facilitate the weakening inside. They want to take a nation and an idea of a democratic republic, and they want to just destroy it from the inside. And they can sit back and they just laugh and laugh and laugh and be like, look what those idiots are doing. They can't even tell the difference between male and female. Like, this is crazy. They don't even know. I guarantee you, the Americans don't even know what a woman is. Like, this is insane. Here's the thing. Identity is directly tied to behavior. So if you disrupt identity, you disrupt behavior.
right.
And so an identity that is fragile or
And an undefined identity is also directly connected to psychological suffering.
Yeah.
In essence,
Yeah. And illness.
It's directly connected to depression, anxiety, a lack of hope and positive feelings. Like, if you have an undefined identity or a fluid identity, it is impossible to have solid mental health, essentially.
Exactly.
Like, it's not possible.
So
because you have to have some sort of stability in order to have mental health. And if you remove that stability, even down to, am I a man or a woman? I don't know. You remove the foundations for mental well-being.
Yep. And so then it easily wrecks mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, social health. Just erodes it. And then you have a nation that a majority of people are completely unfit to
protect themselves.
to get into a fight and say, hey, we're going to protect our way of life and we're going to protect what we believe in. They're completely unable to do that.
They don't even know what they believe in. Like,
Right.
what would they be fighting for?
Exactly.
But
then they're unable to function and live in a healthy way and to think clearly and act clearly And when you think of what it takes to protect freedom, the only reason we're
Well,
enjoying
there's no
all
way
these
we could have an
freedoms-
army.
Well, yeah,
Because
77% of the
age eligible,
age eligible Americans are completely
unfit for
Yeah.
military service.
Yep. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And over 75% of Americans are obese or overweight. I mean,
Which that's a whole nother
That's
topic.
another
the
topic.
the let's call it conspiracy against health through the food pyramid,
Yep.
which is literally a scam.
And then there's a direct link between obesity and brain health.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
that's also, the brain health is also affecting mental emotional health and
Mm-hmm.
relationships. I mean, it's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you just step back and you take a look at the whole, you're like, this is a dumpster
It's
fire.
it's a time bomb
Like,
waiting
it's
to
so
go off.
bad. So there's going to be a falling apart from within. There's going to be, and already is, some form of civil war happening. And sometimes it's a psychological warfare. Other times it's going to be literal warfare. But then there's also attacks from the outside where there are groups who want to destroy freedom and democracy. And again, and that sounds so conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
but it's because when we lack exposure, we've never like actually personally met somebody who truly, genuinely thinks like that and wants to destroy it they want the power. And I get it, because I used to think like this. I would read about Mussolini, and I would read about Karl Marx, and I would read about Stalin and Hitler and think, those are absolute madmen. Like, how did that ever happen? I remember vividly thinking this for years. Like, gosh, I'm grateful that kind of madness doesn't exist anymore. Like, that's a thing of the past.
Right.
That's so naive.
Yeah, because here we are facing the same madness.
But you're like, well, no, people don't think like that anymore. That's madness. That's insanity. There aren't people on the earth in our enlightened age with the internet. And like,
Which
there can't
in a
be people
way,
who think that way literally.
yeah, I
And there
think the internet is actually exacerbating the problem.
Oh, absolutely.
In reality, because it's making this more of a global issue rather than that's why in some ways I feel like we're in a time where it's going to be worse than the Holocaust, because that was isolated.
Yeah.
It could only be spread physically, geographically. Like, that was the limitation. Now we have the internet. So people in Mongolia who have a smartphone can start picking up on some of these ideas,
Yeah.
and we see it in little ways.
Destructive ideologies.
Where they start dressing differently, they start doing things differently, they start identifying differently, they change their pronouns. Like, it's spreading worldwide because of the internet.
Yep.
So it's really sad, because I look at, like, for one example, we were recently in Mongolia. You had previously been there 5 years ago in 2019 before COVID. And since then, I mean, you went, not me, but from your description, things have changed.
Massively.
One example is food. Like, they are getting infiltrated with the SAD diet, the standard American diet. That is going to have a long-term effect on their health and well-being that is just beginning right now.
Yeah, screen addiction is another
They
thing.
will,
we
yeah,
saw
and the
this
screen
time.
addictions.
Yeah.
Like, it was so sad to me to watch young children being entertained by screens in a country like Mongolia, where
they just did, it was just nature. It was all
yeah,
nature.
it was all
Oh,
nature.
man.
So that impact, we are yet to see what impact and how that's going to play out in the developing world.
Well,
Because
and their
right now it's mostly in the modernized, the Western world.
That was the most family-centered country I'd ever traveled in or
Exactly,
seen.
right.
It was absolutely beautiful. And just in the last 5 years, they're
Mhm.
like, well, why get married? Because we see all these people online that seem to be living this happy single life. Like,
no responsibility.
Why take on the responsibility of marriage
Exactly,
and family? That's
right.
such a burden. when I could
Not
just be
realizing that that's
free.
like one of the foundational pieces of having a healthy, happy, meaningful life is to take on responsibility
through marriage and
through
children.
marriage and children.
Like, that's the path to development and education
Growth,
and wealth.
adulthood.
The studies are obvious that the most educated and wealthy people are married.
Yeah,
with
are
families.
still married,
Yeah.
despite the fact that because of the feminist revolution, we came up with this idea that we don't need to be married, we get to be free, and we don't have to deal with the consequences because we have birth control and abortion, still the most educated and the wealthiest people are still getting married because they still know it's a good thing, and it's the poorest people who are suffering the most and suffering all of the psychological impact of those decisions.
Yep. So your probabilities, and this isn't like marriage is the solution to everything. Marriage is hard, and having kids, like, oh, now I have bliss and joy and happiness. Like, no, now I have sleepless nights and snotty noses and dirty diapers and good night and rebellious little turds.
Yeah.
They're like herding cats. But that's the point. It's
Right.
the challenge. It's the struggle that makes us strong.
Right.
So you're trying to increase your probabilities. And the probabilities lean into having high values and standards, having core spiritual practices.
And increasing your levels of responsibility.
Yeah, being more responsible, like getting an education, getting the wealth. You're trying to set up your probabilities to have a really happy, healthy, successful life. And the irony right now is the big message being spread is like, well, just have freedom and entertainment.
Whatever
It's
that
like,
feels like in the moment.
it's bread
you
and
get to decide.
circuses. Like what brought down the Roman Empire. Like it is literally bread and circuses combined with this weird nihilism and relativism.
And definitely Marxism. Like
And,
there's
and ironically, Marxism and fascism, it's all mixed in there.
Yeah.
And it's being spread across the planet. And if you don't have a deep classical education and you're not seeing the breadth and depth of history and time and space, it seems like this amazing, it's cotton candy for everybody.
yeah, right.
And the world's like, this is amazing! Cotton candy for everyone! And it feels fun and pleasurable. And because we live in this empty, frivolous, frothy time period where the consequences are not yet like very, very real. They will be soon, within the next few years. Because the consequences aren't immediate, people are making these decisions, this endless stream of visual trash and cotton candy content and lifestyle. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
What are you guys talking about, you Dennings? You're crazy. Like, what? There's no consequences. Look, I'm living the dream.
Well, and that's the irony, because it's actually the foundation built by our ancestors that was based off of traditional families and traditional communities and traditional roles in a way, right? That was able to build a society that is stable and prosperous and safe. Like, you don't have to. I was joking with our two sons yesterday because there's a line from one of our favorite movies, The Hunt for the Wilder People, about form fillers. Like, you got to be a form filler. You got to fill out forms to do anything, right, in life. And I said, and while we were talking about that, and we joke about that, every time we try to do something, we're like, oh, you got to fill out forms, you know. I said, well, the reality is, though, that allows society to function. Because otherwise, if you wanted to buy something, you could just go over and steal it and kill the guy and take it. Society, that's how society used to work. So we've created a society and a system that, yeah, can sometimes include bureaucracy and forms, but that provides this safety net so that we're not constantly worried about our lives. Am I going to die today? Am I going to be able to eat today? And because we're so far removed from that, we now have these luxury beliefs where, you know what, I wonder if I'm a man or a woman. Right. You know, like that's a luxury belief. It's because your life is so comfortable and easy that you have time to think about whether you're a man or a woman. And guess what? That was built by the people you now despise.
And are mocking.
And it's going to be destroyed by these very ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to point out that you said there, like, you know, our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, they took these traditional ideas and practices and values, but the reason they did that, the reason they're traditional or even classic, we might call them classic, is because they picked up these lessons through disaster, through the collapses of society, and they said, whoa, don't do that again. Let's hold on to these things that work.
Right.
But then a few generations pass, and there it is again.
Like, oh, you guys are just old
Yeah,
fashioned. We don't need that
old-fashioned.
anymore.
So you throw it aside, and guess what happens? There's a collapse in society, if not an annihilation. And then what happens? Traditional core values come back.
Right.
Because that's what works. And they're being thrown aside. And we would be grossly naive to think, well, no, it's like we're so beyond that now. We're so enlightened. We're so developed. Like those things won't happen again because we have technology.
Yeah.
Because we have inventors, and Elon Musk won't let it happen. He'll save us. Whichever president happens to get in, they'll prevent that from happening. It's like, give me a break. It's a joke. And so the Titanic is sinking.
Yeah.
It's going down. And some are trying to straighten the deck chairs as though that's going to make any difference. But the reality is, all that we're seeing, all these things we've been talking about and trying to identify or articulate, they're all symptoms of a sinking ship.
Right. And I think they're symptoms of a problem that is a very, very serious disease that can literally kill society as we know it. And I guess the reason we're having this conversation is because, at least for me, I'm being woken up to this. Like, if we want to go back to the whole idea of woke, it's time to woke up. Like, you need to be awake. But for real, this time, we need to wake up. We need to wake up to what is actually happening and realize that things are heading in a very, very dark direction, like destructive direction. And I know if you haven't been thinking about this or learning about this or paying attention to this, you're kind of like, you guys are a little crazy. You're a little extreme here. Like, I just don't see that. I just don't think. But my
guess is most have observed it and they're just like, yeah, it's pretty weird, but I still got to go to the grocery store. I'm still taking my kids to a little school.
Life still goes on.
I got to go to church, and like my life's pretty much the same. I don't know why you guys are saying the sky's falling, because things are good for me still. Mm-hmm. Or there's some of you who've noticed it, but it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying to face it and think about it, and you'd rather not. Mm-hmm. Every time you notice it, you're like, oh, that's scary.
Let's avoid it.
What's for lunch? Let's go focus on lunch. And
exactly.
Then what are we getting? What movie are we going to watch on Friday? Let's focus on that, because thinking about that or facing it is terrifying. And the last thing you want to do is what we're actually recommending you do, is you speak up and do something about it and get into the fight. And I'll throw this down right now. It is so easy to pick an opinion. It's so much easier to pick an opinion than it is to pick a fight, to get in the fight. And it's easier to put on your little bracelet and like, we're with whoever.
Change your Facebook profile.
Yeah, little profile change, or even a bumper sticker. Most people don't have bumper stickers anymore because they don't want to ruin their nice cars. But it's the bumper sticker approach of like, I put a sticker on there so that people behind me, they see that I stand for something. That's so much easier than actually getting involved and standing up, stay standing up, speak up, and keep speaking up, even when they call you a racist or a bigot or prejudiced or homophobe or whatever, or just pointing out the problems, but actually getting in and doing something about it. And for a long time, you and I were both like this. It's like, look, people want to do their thing, do your thing, whatever, I don't care. But at some point, when whatever they're doing starts to infringe upon the rights of others, that's when you have to fight back. That's when you have to draw a line. And so, as people are like, no, let them do their thing. Like, I'm tolerant. I'm a nice person. Like, I'm all right. You wanna do those things? Okay, like go do your thing. But when that goes too far and they step up and like, oh no, you need to treat me this way, and we're gonna change the laws, and we're gonna force feed this to children, and we're gonna pass a law. No, we've gone way too far, and we have to fight back so they can crawl back in the dark little hole that those ideas come from and stay there. Like, if you want to live in a dark hole and do weird things, do it. You start preying on children, I'll come after you with all the force I can bring. You start preying on little kids and innocent women.
That's where it's going. It's already there in many ways, but it's going there in a greater force.
And they're trying to normalize it, and they're trying to legalize it, and make it seem just fine, and they're trying to make it common, and they're really making this push of like, well, let's legalize this, let's normalize it, let's say that it's okay to take advantage of people.
Well, and
hell no.
I
I
know
am gonna fight.
that probably sounds crazy to a lot of people because they think, oh, it's not going to go there. Yeah, maybe we're legalizing all these other things.
There.
You can change your sex, you can change all of this, but it's not going to go to that. But we've seen college professors teaching college classes about mentor attracted persons. Like it's just another thing.
Minor attracted.
Sorry, minor attracted persons. Like it's just another thing. To normalize along with everything else we've already normalized. There's no such thing as sex. There's no, gender is a thing and it's fluid. They're already teaching these ideas, and this is just the next step, and that is where it's going. It's already there in many places. Now the challenge is that we don't see it. And that's, if you're not paying attention and you're not noticing and you don't understand the significance, it's hard to put the puzzle together and to know what picture it's making. But that's what we have been trying to do for 4 years or more. And when you start getting the picture clearly, which I feel like even though we're undereducated about it in general and there's still so much we don't know, I'm starting to see the picture. And it's a dark, horrifying picture.
Yeah, as ignorant as I am, I'm seeing the picture. And
exactly.
Oh my goodness. And somebody might be like, oh, it's because you're ignorant. You don't see the picture. You don't see how progressive we are and how enlightened we've become. Like, no, all you got to do is study enough history and be like, hey, this has happened before.
Yeah.
This is not the first time.
New. Besides the fact that there's multiple, like if this was a war, which it is, there's multiple battles going on and none of them are pretty. One of the things I recently listened to, we both listened to a podcast about it, and it was talking about in the UK, they're having a ton of problems, tons of problems, which also has to do with the increase in immigration, both legal and illegal, which to me is also a difficult subject because I love immigrants. I love going to other countries. I love interacting with other people. Like I have a love of culture and different races and different belief systems and different religions.
And we got to make this personal here. It's not like theoretical. It's not hypothetical.
Yeah, we
know a lot of people personally who are our friends, who are immigrants, who are just sincerely striving to live a better life.
Exactly. And we have also lived in lots of countries, including many Muslim countries. We've lived in Morocco for extended period of time.
Mexico and
Turkey.
Every country in Central America.
Yeah.
South America. Like we know these cultures and these people. They're our friends and our neighbors.
Yes. But just like every culture and every religion, on the extreme end, there is danger. And so specifically in this podcast episode we listened to, one of the recent things that happened, there's been many happening, is that there was a immigrant who came from a Muslim country who I think the story was his parents had immigrated and he just came along for the ride or whatever. They were escaping a war-torn country.
So they're starting a new life, and he grew up just spoiled and blind and clueless.
I don't know the full story, but basically, they did talk about how it is often the immigrants' children who resonate more with these extreme ideologies.
They get radicalized.
They get radicalized because they grow up, they don't totally fit into their new culture because they are immigrants, right? And so there's this disparity that leads to radicalization. He went to a dance class. I don't know. They said it was a Taylor Swift dance class for 9-year-olds. Slit their throats of 9-year-old British children. And the problem was that the media, because of government influence, was trying to cover up the fact that this was an immigrant.
Who had been radicalized.
So...
here's why. Because who can say something? Because if you say something, you're racist.
You're
racist,
prejudiced. Exactly. But the problem that they were discussing in this episode is but what can we say? What can we do? When there's an increase of this type of violence by immigrants who have been radicalized by extremists, what can we do about it? We can't continue to allow children to be murdered. What do we do? And I also bring this up because this is a problem that America is also facing. Again, being in general, a pro-immigration person, we also have to talk about the ugly side of immigration. We also have to talk about the negative side of these issues. So again, it's a puzzle with lots of pieces. There's lots of battles going on. There's so much going into it. It's very complicated. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to any of these things. But ultimately, it is lots and lots of things that are going on that are literally leading to the destruction of a way of being, a way of life.
Yeah, and cultures and societies, and that's part of the fight of this having a culture, and which is a good thing. Having a culture is a good thing. But then if you try to maintain a culture, they'll give you some labels and tell you you're a horrible person, and why should you have a culture? You're just so prejudiced, and you live within your little borders, and you're so privileged, and you're probably a white male.
Right, especially if you're white.
Because now, right now, the white
culture?
Male is just getting thrown under the bus. So, I shouldn't even, according to them, I shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion or to vocalize it, because what do I know?
Yeah.
I was just handed everything on a silver platter because I was born
because of your privilege,
with pasty white freckled skin and a penis. And wow, everything was given to me, except it wasn't, because my dad left, and then stepdads came and went, and I ended up out on my own at 16, living in a hellhole.
Well, that doesn't matter.
As a privileged white man.
Yeah, you're a privileged white male.
Fought my way into university. Has been the first one in my family to go, but it was all because I was so privileged. And my homelessness must have been privileged.
It was a privilege.
Those times when I was starving, sleeping in an old truck, and could only afford ramen noodles.
Right.
It was because of my white privilege and being a male, of course. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't know what we can say about it, because that's literally where society is at this moment. And so I don't even know, what's the point, and what can be done about it? I don't know. The truth is, I don't know.
I don't either. But
that's why we're having this conversation.
The first part is just be aware. Hey, let's just open our eyes. Let's wake up a little bit and let's look at it. Because often we want to avoid it, right? We don't want to look over there. It's like there's a disturbance over here, and you're like, I'm just going to pretend. Look at this, kids. Look at this. Let's look over here. This is so nice, because you're avoiding looking at the thing that's the problem. That's ugly. That's scary.
Right.
You're like, we're going to avoid this. If you see a couple guys roughing up some girl over there, the vast majority of people, and they've done this social experiments, whatever, the vast majority of people are just going to walk away. They're going to avoid it.
But the problem is that is probably the best response for the vast majority of people, because they're not trained to be able to handle something like that. Going in to interfere with the lack of skills makes you a victim. Comes back to the underlying problem is that in too many ways, we're just completely unprepared for what's happening and what's coming.
Well, there's one thing there is get yourselves prepared.
Come to the asset training that we're holding so that you can...
Exactly. So you can be an asset.
You can be an asset.
To your family and to society.
Right. Exactly.
Come learn these skills. Learn how to protect yourself. Learn how to...
And basic combatives and
medical training,
self-defense.
Be helpful. We're going to talk about how to think through scenarios and situations, how to have situational awareness and what to do. And even if you do see something like that, you don't walk over there, hey guys, please stop. It's not very nice what you're doing. Turn on your camera, get on your phone, call the police, call 911, turn your camera, film it, start yelling, get the people over. Keep your distance. But you get 20 people hey, knock it off, stop. And you start creating something. You can do it from a safe place, or get in your car and go over and drive them over. Whatever.
You're so extreme, Greg.
No way. If somebody's really attacking an innocent person, and the only, self-defense weapon I have is my vehicle, I'm going to use it. Right? Whatever. We have to think differently, but we're trying to avoid it. We're trying to avoid the issues. So let's have some awareness. Let's start talking about it. Let's start thinking. Let's face it. And as uncomfortable as scary as it is, the best thing we can do is face it. We have to face the problems that are facing us. Mm-hmm. We have to. So that's the first step. But then I want to encourage all of you listening, do something to prepare yourself, whatever way to actually get involved, and not by changing your Facebook profile and getting a bumper sticker and a bracelet, or taking on this opinion I support whatever. Do something about it. Get in. I
think if nothing else,
fight.
By educating yourself about it, by actually learning about what's going on and what significance it has.
And then spreading education.
Yeah.
Well, education arguably is the most powerful tool in the world. So spreading education could be one of the best ways to get in the action
Right.
and to stop.
Which
insanity.
requires you to educate yourself. Like, you can't just be spreading opinions. You have to be spreading whatever education you have, which is what we're trying to do here. Like, yeah, we don't get this on Jordan Peterson's level or these other authors and thinkers and leaders. We don't understand it to that level, but at the level we do understand it, we are trying to talk about it, and we're telling our children about it, and we're trying to help them understand. That's why we watched a video about fascism this morning, especially because we live in a country, Portugal, that's fascist leaning. You know, we want to understand these principles and why they're important and what the bigger picture long-term consequences of these things are, because otherwise we can just get swept up in it and just be like, oh yeah, let's just go along. It's just, you know, it's just the way of the world now. So yeah, no big deal.
Or
let's
we
just,
think,
let's just change our pronouns on Instagram and, you know, be a part of that whole thing because it's trendy. It's the thing to do, rather than realizing that there's actually a bigger movement happening here that at the end of the road is a disaster
Exactly.
waiting to happen for all of
Yes.
us.
So yeah.
So don't get on board. You know, if you've changed your pronouns on Instagram, take them off there. Like little things like that, so that we start standing up against the movement rather than just half-heartedly contributing to it because that's what people are doing.
Right. Exactly. Just going along. If you know that the train tracks are blown out, like, don't stay on the train.
Right.
That's
exactly.
ridiculous.
Get off the train.
Get off the train. But nor can we just say, you know what? I'm going to let other people do it. I'm going to let this play out. I'm just going to live my life. We can't do that either, because we've seen, history has shown us time and time again that people who are good people, who are trying to live traditional values, they become pretty passive and they think this will just play out and it won't affect me. That's not true. It ends up becoming a sweeping fire that consumes everything and everyone, including you and your family. Don't just stick your head in the sand and hope it blows past, because it won't.
Unless you want to move away to some remote, isolated location and be a hermit family,
Well,
then
that
you know,
is
that's
very,
an option.
very appealing, actually, and I think of it often.
Yes.
There's many times where I'm like, let's just go somewhere so far removed that it's very unlikely to affect this place. And there are places like that in the world. That's awesome. It's true. She was like, no, I'm out, man. I go live in the woods in my bus with my family.
Like Captain Fantastic.
Captain Fantastic style. You know, there's something to that, but we also need warriors. And so those of you who are listening who have the warrior heart, who feel the call,
I
turn
think there are
yourself into
too
an
few
asset.
warriors because the warrior mentality has literally been indoctrinated out of society.
I agree.
So I don't know that there are many that hear the call, because that is a bad thing. That's toxic masculinity right there. If you feel like you're some sort of warrior and you
you
might
need to
want to
fight.
fight for something,
Yeah.
that's toxic.
Fight against these.
Because you're supposed to be more like a woman and less like a man.
Right there is so screwed up, because the only reason we enjoy freedoms to be able to say
comfortable, safe society that we live in?
stupid things
Yeah.
is because real men fought for freedom. And now you're, well, we shouldn't be like that. That's toxic masculinity. No more fighting.
Which is part of the long game of the destruction of society, because if you make men more effeminate and you demasculinize them, you don't have warriors to fight and to protect the society. And that is what's happening. I mean, it really is. It's really happening intentionally. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is. And we're not the only ones who have said, like, multiple people, various platforms are talking about this. Yeah. It's happening. Yeah. And one of the ways we see that that's happening is all of the protesting that's going on in the universities. And this is the irony to me that's obviously been pointed out by others, is that the very people who are protesting in support of Hamas and Palestine are often the type of people that would be immediately killed by them, because
after they were raped and tortured and filmed and like the killers like celebrate.
Yeah. but because they are in direct violation of everything they believe as a religious group.
Right.
Like,
It's just
they're
so
not going to
naive.
support you in your gender fluidity.
Yeah.
No,
They're gonna
you
kill
will be killed.
This has been
Unhappy thought.
a little bit of sunshine in your morning.
A
from
little
the
bit of a
dimmings.
reality check.
Yeah. No, it needs to be a
Perhaps.
reality check. And it's a good one. It's an important one. Would you rather not know? Would you rather get blindsided and not see it coming and just like, oh, I didn't see it coming. I wish somebody would have told me. Hey, we're telling you, it's coming.
It's exactly the same thing that happened in Nazi Germany, and it happened in Stalin's Russia, and it happens in all the places that the people don't know it's coming, because we want to believe that that's not really
That
going to happen.
nobody
That that's
is
not really
that
that
screwed
people
up.
aren't that bad. That it's not really going to be that bad. It's not going to get that bad. That's what we want to believe. That's, I don't know, human nature, I guess, but
I guess this podcast episode is about believing that it can get that bad again. Because it has.
it has gotten that bad. That's
Yeah.
that's the
But
point.
we're already in it.
has been that bad, and in some places in the world, it still is that bad. I mean, North Korea, it's bad there.
Having never been
Having read about it,
from one person.
it's
Yeah.
bad in that it's a totalitarian state with
Yeah. Well,
a
okay,
complete lack of
here's-
freedom and
here's what I can say.
food and resources.
I
You've
have
been to Cuba.
in Cuba.
Yeah.
I got to
Communism
see-
is
I got to see it in real
not
time.
good.
Yeah, it was devastating, and the suffering is real.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the point is that if we continue to adopt these philosophies, which, okay, that's something we didn't really even talk about or dive into, but is an important part of this equation, is that when you get right down to it, what is happening is essentially a form of Marxism. That's basically what's happening. It's a form of Marxism. And when you adopt that in your society, I mean, then you're basically practically almost there with communism and totalitarianism, like government control. So we're not that far away from having that become a reality for us. I guess that's the danger. That's the risk, is that the society that we live in is based on, currently, on democratic principles, Western ideas, and that is being eroded.
They're not flawless. Western ideas aren't.
No, they're
flawless.
not.
I mean, there's a
They're
lot
not,
of
but they're
problems.
so far some of the best ideas that humans have come up with, because, like you love to say, results don't lie. I mean, yeah, the Western world is not the perfect world, but if you compare it to history, to where humans have come from, and to other places where there is not democracy and individual rights and freedom of property, to own property, free trade, things are worse off
Yeah,
there.
they're really bad.
I'm telling you, just even talking about Cuba, it's worse there. North Korea is worse. It's worse off. So for us to think that, oh, well, we're not that great, we're not that important, our culture doesn't matter, we're nobody special, yeah, in some ways that's true. But in other ways, it's not true.
Right.
It's 100% wrong, because results don't lie. And democratic nations are some of the most prosperous and safest in the world and in history. That's a result that means something. And we're losing that if we undercut its value
Yep.
and significance.
Well, or if we let it, most of the people listening to this podcast, we won't be the ones driving it into destruction. We'll be the ones that, because
Watch
of
it.
some passivity, we allow it to happen.
Right.
We watch it just go down, like, oh, that's really sucks. I sure enjoyed my life. But at some point, I don't know, I guess maybe the mental wrestle is, we want to avoid the fighting. We want to avoid being part of the battle. But it's either get in the fight that tries to prevent it, or by force, you'll be forced to be in the fight. That's way worse. So if we can prevent any of it, even in small circles.
Even in our families.
Yeah. If we can prevent it in our families.
Because, that's another thing we didn't touch on either, but these ideologies are destroying families.
Yep.
I mean, it's
They are
literally, it's anti-family at its very nature. Like, if you look at something like queer theory, which started, I think, in the 60s, it's anti-identity, it's anti-family, it's anti-anything that's good or stable, or like this comes from their own wording. Like their books and their papers that they have written, this is essentially what they stand for. They stand, which is what Marxism is too. It's anti anything and everything. Anything that exists should be destroyed. That's basically Marxism. And Karl Marx was literally, as proclaimed by himself and his father and mother, was essentially possessed by a demon. Like that was his belief, that he was a tool of Satan.
Well,
literally, he wrote that
many
and
of
believed
his
that.
ideas are genuinely satanic.
Right. And so, that is the foundation of some of these ideologies. And if we don't stand up against them,
We'll get swept up.
we get swept up in them.
I will say this adamantly, with all the force I can share here. If we do not teach our children effectively and deliberately how to think clearly about this, they will be swept up in this retarded ideology. Even tweens, well, even your kids now. Kids are getting swept up in this, and then the teenagers, and then the teens and young adults are just being swept aside. They're caught up in the tide and the current, and they're off they go, and it's happy. And,
Right.
woo,
Well,
this is a
especially
blast.
because in the episode we just listened to, or I just listened to, like they are directly targeting children.
Yep.
They're targeting the school system. They want to teach queer theory. For one, because it's also directly connected with, in some forms, pedophilia, because the founders of queer theory were essentially pedophiles. And so the whole mentor-attracted person and all of that, like that's an underlying...
They're teaching sexuality to children.
And so they are directly targeting children, and they have a whole approach, a whole philosophy. Now this is not to say that every single person who's pro LGBTQ, who's gay, who identifies as queer is like, it's not to say that they have this agenda.
Right.
But the people who started the movement, the people who wrote the original documents, this is their agenda. And they have what they call it like trauma bonding. Like they have this whole approach to breaking down the belief systems of children so that they can provide the solution, which is queer theory, queer identity, fluidity, openness, no identity. You aren't, which in many ways correlates with like communist China, where the government, the state, the ideology is more important than family. It's more important than love. Like love's not a thing. It's more important than relationships. It's more important than marriage.
They want to set themselves up as the most important thing.
Yeah. Like, no, it's Brave New World. It literally is Brave New World, where none of that matters. And you're all just, like, there's no identity to you. There's no structure. There's no
relationships. Yeah.
There's nothing that's more important than just you being an individual that can change.
That does everything for the state.
Yeah. And can change your identity and your gender at any time.
And this assault on children it's another attack on children. It literally is. And so even trying to teach them, it's another form of abusing children, taking advantage of children because they're young and innocent and more malleable and more easily brainwashed. We have to protect our kids.
Right.
Physically and ideologically.
So going back to the idea of like, yeah, one of the best things we can do is to educate ourselves so that we can protect our families. Because if we are not teaching our children about this and how dangerous these ideologies can be, then who is?
Yep.
No one is. No one else is teaching them any different. In fact, they're teaching them the opposite. And they're going to teach your children that if you speak contrary to it, you are actually the bigot. Yep. You are actually the racist. You are actually the one in the wrong, which is exactly what they did in communist China. Like, if you listen to Wild Swans, that is the story. When the government is telling you that your own family is the problem.
Yep.
Because they are keeping you away from belonging.
And that legit is happening in the schools already, where the legislation has been passed, and it's happening where they don't have to communicate at all with the parents, and so teachers and administrators are disregarding.
It was
parents,
passed into
trashing
law
parents.
in California that a teacher is not required to even tell the parent, if their child decides, if they identify as a different gender or they decide to have a transition surgery, like it's not required that they tell the parents. Parents don't even have to know this.
Okay, so I know some of you are like, well, what do I read? What education do I work on? And I just thought of several books that you should read.
I think we'll
teach your
make a
kids.
list and we'll include it in the show notes along with, because we did a recent episode about resources versus resourcefulness and being resourceful and the fourth turning and all of that. And we wanted to make a book. Someone asked for a book list about that. So I think we should it could be the same book list that has the list of books to help you be resourceful, along with the list of books of what to read to understand what's happening.
What's coming.
Like what is going on here.
So read.
And how do we understand it?
Get the link, and then get the list and read or listen to. Many of them are on Audible, so it's great to listen to them while you're driving or doing the dishes or whatever. Read them, mark them up, and please, please, please teach the core principles to your families and to others within your circle of influence. That's where we can start. Okay, love you guys. Reach upward.